I thought I would take some time to put my own thoughts on 9/11. I've never taken the time to put them on audio until last September when I did so at the 9/11 Museum at Ground Zero, where they have a recording booth. They actually have several that you can leave your own personal remembrances and what happened on your 9/11. Where were you at and what you went through? So my experience started off on Sunday. I was excited. My dad was coming over. He lives with my mom a few hours to the west, and he had a business trip that he was going on Monday, and it was over to the East Coast, up I want to say South Carolina area, and he was a contractor for the military, so they had war games that they were planning, and he had to go up there and deal with that. And so Monday morning he took off. I wished him, told him goodbye. We had some breakfast. He left, and I went to work. And I picked up my state car because it was actually my first ever business trip after graduating college. I was working for the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. I had just started there roughly in June, right after graduation. And I worked there as a programmer, computer programmer. And our business trip, I worked, our particular department in DEP, our bureau, worked for petroleum storage and regulation and cleanup. And so we were putting on a conference down in Daytona Beach. So I was excited. Hey, I'm going to go spend the week at the beach. It's going to be fun. Even though we have to work, we're going to have a good time. So I went to the office myself. I picked up the state car, checked it out, and picked up a couple coworkers and our equipment. And we headed south ourselves. We headed towards the east and headed down through Jacksonville, down I-95, down to Daytona Beach. And Monday was normal, Talked to my dad on the phone. I had a cell phone back then. Not a smartphone. I had a cell phone, though, and so did my dad. And so I called, talking back and forth about different traffic jams and stuff to be aware of as we both headed in the same direction. So we got down to Daytona Beach. We set things up. We got a conference ready that was going to kick off on Tuesday, September 11th. And once we got everything done, a whole group of coworkers were like, hey, let's go grab something to eat. And then a few of us decided, to partake that night, went out and had a little fun, and a little too much fun, as it would turn out. But Tuesday morning, we still got up on time, went to the general session where everybody was going to be in the main room for the first hour or two, just hearing what everybody needed to hear before we went to breakout sessions. And back then, there wasn't really text messaging. It had just started, and I was a weather nut. I'm still a weather nut. And I had a service I signed up for weather alerts. And I remember my phone beeping at me, and I picked it up and I looked at it, and there was a news alert. And I thought that was unusual because it was not weather related. And that news alert said plane had flown into the World Trade Center. I was like, well, what sightseeing guy got too close and, flew into the building? Could he see the building? Did he just get too close and the wind blew him into it? I'm like, how bad could this be? And I'm not really a coffee drinker. I'm more of if I'm going to have something, it's going to be like unsweet tea, or I'm going to have, back then it was Mountain Dew or Coke. So I was like, let me leave the session a little thirsty. Let me grab something. And I went outside and I was like, well, I'm going to grab what's free. So I grabbed some coffee. And the coffee station happened to be right next to what's a bar in the hotel resort that we were staying at in the afternoons and the evening. And they had the TV on. It was on CNN. And I saw the hole in the World Trade Center. And I looked at it, and it was hard to tell at first how big this was. Let's face it, when you're standing back looking at that building, you just don't really, unless you're in person, you just can't respect how big that building is. And so I saw the hole and then backed out, and I started, they zoomed in. And when they zoomed into the close shot, you could start counting windows. And I realized that this was no small plane. And I was like, well, what could have happened? I just don't understand it. It looks like a clear sunny day. There's no way someone just willingly flew into this building. And I was sitting there and I started seeing people jump. And I knew that was not a good sign. I was like, my heart just dropped. I was like, oh my God, this is going to get much worse before it gets better. And it was, as soon as that crossed my mind, I was watching the CNN shot where we were on the backside, so you're on the opposite direction from where the second plane flew into the second tower. And I saw the explosion after I saw a plane. I was like, why is this guy flying so close? And instantly he flies into the building. And I remember just being lost for words. It's almost like time stood still, and I just didn't understand what was happening. I just couldn't comprehend that someone had the ability to get a hold of some aircraft, take them over, hijack them, and fly them into somewhere. Hijacking didn't cross my mind these days and age, in this day and age, because it was so difficult. At least in my mind, it was difficult to do. There's no way you can get a bomb on an aircraft or a gun. Our security is pretty good. So I instantly went back also to 1993. I knew that this building had been attacked before. We knew it was a target for terrorism. And so I knew we were under attack. My mind finally snapped in after probably what was about 1 or 2 minutes. And I put my coffee down. I ran back into the main room, and I instantly told all the people that I was sitting around that we were under attack and that we needed to leave. Because my other thoughts were, if they could get 2 planes, then what's coming next? I have no idea. I know that this is a coordinated attack of some sort. And our bureau chief at the time, Mike Ashey, he was a Marine, so he had military experience. And by then, the room was abuzz. Everybody knew what was going on. We were all, I wouldn't say in a panic, but we didn't want to be there. And the bureau chief went to the microphone, and I remember him stopping and basically telling us that we can't leave. That we can't leave. If we leave now, we'll give in to the terrorists. It'll show them that we're scared, and that's what they want. They want us all to be afraid. And our job is to stay the rest of the week and finish the conference. And I can tell you right now, I didn't care at all what he had to say. I didn't care. I didn't believe in that at the time. I did not believe in it at all. So my boss, one of her coworkers, and my partner, another programmer that started the same day I did, we all went up to my boss's suite and we turned on CNN and we started watching. And we were unfortunately watching people jump out of this building and seeing people run for their lives, and the interviews on the street. And I was like, well, this will be okay. The firefighters are going to do what they're doing. I'm watching them on CNN. They're coming from all over. They're going to grab some axes and some other gear and some air bottles and some hoses, and they're going to go up and they're going to start fighting this fire. They're going to knock it down. And, unfortunately, we know the people on the plane are dead, but hopefully, there's not that many in the building, fingers crossed, that got killed. And I was sitting there watching, and I saw like a puff of smoke come out of the one tower, the second tower that got hit. Actually, it was the second tower. And I was like, there's no, and before I could even say no, I watched the top of the building start to fall. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe the only top a part of it. Maybe it'd only be the top. And with the smoke cloud, you couldn't see anything. So I was like, well, hopefully it's just the top. It just fell off. It created some dust. And then I realized as the smoke started to thin, that tower was gone. The entire tower. I was like, oh my God, how that's physically impossible. I was like, there's no way that tower collapsed. Not thinking that jet fuel, a plane, and all the materials in that building are going to fuel a raging fire. And when fire gets hot enough, especially when it knocks off fire retardant coating on steel, that steel will warp. And when floors crash onto one another, they can't support the weight of the second floor that fell onto that floor, and it basically just becomes like stepping on a giant tin can. And so I remember they just couldn't fathom it. I mean, I asked my boss probably 10 times in a row to the point that she had to tell me to stop, asking her if the building was gone. Did that really happen? And so we watched all these people run, and I remember watching the second tower fall in complete disbelief. There's just no way you could erase those from the New York City time area, the skyline. There's just that it couldn't happen. That can't happen. That engineering wouldn't let that happen. And as we would know, we would find out later through the studies and everything that happened, that it did happen, and there was a reason that it happened, and that basically there is no building that's safe. If you get it hot enough and the floors collapse, that buildings will collapse in on itself. And I will say that I went back. It was probably 5 years after 9/11. My wife and I went to New York City, and they were still building the the Freedom Tower. They had already cleaned up the site. Freedom Tower was under construction. And at that time, they had a small gift shop that was the very, very, very early beginnings of a 9/11 museum. And so I got an NYPD hat, an NYFD hat, and bought some books reading about the survivor stories. And, didn't know at that time what this would become. And then this last October, I went with my cousin back to New York City for a few days, and my primary goal was to go to the 9/11 museum. And now this time was different. This time I was a deputy sheriff. So I know what it meant to be ready to pay the ultimate sacrifice for those that are around us, for our community, for our neighbors. And so I went to the 9/11 museum, and I can tell you right now that from the moment you get there to the moment that you get a block away, you're going to need a box of tissues. And I say that as a guy that I'm not too proud to let my emotions show, but you try to hold them back. And I can say at that site's impossible. Absolutely impossible. I don't want to talk too much about it because I want people to go there. I want people to experience it for themselves, not for visiting it as a tourist attraction. I want you to visit it so that you can pay your respects to those that paid the ultimate sacrifice that day. And I also want to point out something that people were making a point to point out this particular anniversary. I know as a first responder that we always talk about the heroes on that day being firefighters, EMTs, police officers. But from reading and listening to survivor stories, there were dozens, if not hundreds, and maybe even more than that, heroes on that day. People that were civilians that ran upstairs, that were fire wardens, that knew their friends were trapped. And rather than give up, they went up instead of going down to go get them. And they didn't make it out. People that, grabbed people that were injured and pulled them inside a business to offer them a bottle of water to hold them there until emergency services could get to them. I mean, it's just the simple things on that day. So many people came together. So I want to honor, take the time to honor those civilians on top of all the first responders on that day. But I will tell you this, that anyone that was alive on that day that can remember that day, and even those that weren't alive, that they want to educate themselves, or you want to educate them, take them to the museum. It's an eye-opening experience. It's a humbling experience. But I'm glad I went. I'm glad I got to pay my respects. And I'll say this, though, I'll never let a 9/11 go by and not take the time on 9/11 to pause and reflect on those we lost. Not only on those we lost, those that really showed what it means to be a hero. Those that gave up their lives so that others may live, or at least attempt to help others live. And that includes the civilians, like I said, that did the simple things. And I'm also going to stop and remember the positive aspect of 9/11 that we saw, of people lining bridges, of people coming together in parks and coming together. It didn't matter your color, your religion, your race, your sex, your gender. Nothing mattered. All that mattered is that everybody came together to say, this isn't right, that we'll be strong, and we're going to support those that came to help and answered the call to respond when the buildings were on fire, when they collapsed, to dig through the rubble. And so, like I said, I just wanted to take the time to talk about my 9/11. And hopefully you're willing to talk about your 9/11. And if you want to do so, I'll be glad to help you put your 9/11 recording out there as well. So thanks for listening.